Today, I want to show you how to use the community using the mobile app. To access the mobile app, you need to download Mighty Networks from Apple Store or through Play Store. Once you download Mighty Networks, search for our community, Vidy Potdar, and join. Once you join the community, you will see an interface like this. Here at the very bottom, you can chat with other members in the community. You can add a new post. You can check your notifications through the bell icon, and you can check your profile. You can also add the post from up here. I'll just do a sample post to show how this works. Once you've done that, click post. It will ask you whether you want to add a tag. You can add many of the tags. Let's add research. And you can see the post is now live. You can comment on the post. You can like the post. The same thing can be done from here to the plus icon. It will again take you back to the same thing. You can create a few other things, like you can ask a question, you can create an event, or you can create an article. So if you want to create an article which is available to all the members, it's fairly straightforward as creating a post. You need to give a title and then start writing the article. Once you've done that, click post. Again, it will ask you to pick a topic. You can say research or any other topic that is relevant. It will say your article is live. Up at the top, you can see these three lines. This gives you the option to discovery, members, topics, groups, events, and settings. So let's go into discovery. Discovery is a place where you will see all the information that the host has put, that is I have put here. So there is featured posts or there are upcoming events. Top members, these are automatically selected here depending upon who is active on the community. You can see all different types of topics and you can follow these topics if they are of your interest. Members near you is a very interesting feature of this app. It shows you the members who are close to you geographically. So maybe in the same city or maybe in the same suburb. If you click on members, it will show you different members in this community. Topics, these are all the different topics that are created on this community. You can follow them. And when you are creating a post or an article, you can select any of these topics to tag your article or your post. In the events tab, you can see any upcoming events that have been posted here. There are different groups that we can create. So far, I have only created 2 groups. If you think you want to create a group and manage a group on the community, please let me know and I can create that group for you. So you can go to your personal profile, go to personal settings. You can check your account. You check notifications here. You can get your email updates for any changes that happen on the community whenever anyone posts. You can even get these notifications pushed onto the mobile app. Plus, there are many different types of notifications that you can see, and you have complete control of what kind of notifications you want. So you can enable and disable them as you prefer. You can even edit your profile, add a cover photo, add a mini bio, also give an introduction about yourself because that will help you and others to find you. The other option that you can see here is the option to invite. You can just add multiple email addresses here and the invites would be sent straight away. You can also share the link for this community on your social network so that they can directly click on the link and join. Once you invite members, you can become a bronze level member, a silver level member, and you become a gold member when you refer and 25 members join the community. There will be specific advantages and benefits for these three levels. So that's pretty much. It's very easy to use app. I recommend all of you to download this app from the App Store and start using it. It is a very easy and convenient way to connect with researchers on the community. I hope you all get onto this app. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. How are you today? Thanks a lot for joining. I hope you saw the brief video that I had played just now. The reason I wanted to show that video was I don't know how many of you are using the mobile app to access the community, but it is a very convenient way to connect with all the researchers. So I thought I'll show you that video. All right, so let me get started. Let me set up the PowerPoint. Give me 1 minute. All right. So thank you all very much for attending this seminar. This is the fourth seminar in the series, and I'm very happy to see a lot of loyal participants who have started this journey with me and are even attending today, even on the fourth session. So it's very happy to hear that. Just wanted to know if you guys can hear me clearly. Can you all hear me clearly? If someone could just let me know. I hope I am audible. Very clear. Okay, thanks, Inarni. Thanks for that clarification. Good. All right, so let's begin. Today is going to be a very, I guess, the most important part of this session, because we are going to learn how we are going to criticize, evaluate, analyze, synthesize literature that goes into your systematic literature review paper. Okay. This is a standard disclaimer that I have to show before I begin my webinar today. It is being done on a Sunday using all my resources and not affiliated with my employer. So I wanted to start today by showing you this slide. I'm very pleased to see the kind of response that I have received. The first session got a massive views, over 11,000 views for the first session. Second session is nearly reaching 2,000, and the third session is about to reach 1,000. So when I look at these numbers, I feel very happy because I see a lot of people are viewing this and benefiting from the initiative that I have taken. So thank you all for your loyal support. Secondly, I wanted to thank all of you who have joined the community. In less than, or in just in 20 days, we have formed a network of 500 plus people. And I'm thankful to all of you for being part of that journey. It would not have been possible without you. And I think that number is going to rise as we go into the future. So coming to today's agenda, the main focus of today is going to be evaluating a research paper, how to evaluate a research paper so that we can include that in our systematic literature review. Like last webinar, webinar 3, even here today, today I have multiple case studies. I have stick to the same papers so that we are kind of familiar with those papers and we don't need to download them again. and we will do some paper writing towards the end of the session. All right. So criticizing or evaluating a research paper is one of the most important aspect in research, and this is something that you have to be as a good researcher, you would require you should be very good at it. So it is a skill that you build, and I found some excellent resources that I'm using today. And if you follow those resources, those steps that are provided in that document, I think you will be one of those successful researchers as well. Last week, I introduced you to Prisma methodology. So in today's session, the focus of the Prisma that we are going to cover is on the results section. Okay, so I'm not going through each of these steps individually because I have given you the paper to read already, and I believe you might have read or you might be in the process of reading it. So, but whatever we are going to cover is going to be part of the results and the synthesis part of the Prisma checklist. Okay, so for the first part of the session, I'm going to use this document, and you can see the link at the bottom of the slide. This document is from Flinders University, and they have done a very good article that shows how to criticize, do a critical analysis of academic literature. And it has been through it, and they pick up each and every item. So we will go through that in detail. It is a 4 or 5 page document, I think. And I suggest after this session, you can download that and you can follow it as well. It is very easy and handy document. So whenever you have written something, this is kind of a document where you can go and check whether the critical evaluation that you have done for the paper is actually filling whatever is required, or do you need to add something more. So it's a very interesting way to kind of validate your research writing. Okay, so what I will do now is I will just make the screen full screen. I'll take off my video so you can get a better view of this, and I'll come in between during the Q&A sessions. All right, so here when we look at so writing the critique or writing the literature review, when we are writing a literature review, when we are criticizing literature, what we have to do is we have to look at all the different aspects of the research paper and evaluate whether those different aspects, how good they are they or if they have any drawbacks. So basically do a pros and cons of the entire paper, and not just the research content, but starting from the title itself. And one very important thing to notice or to kind of learn is okay, I see some comments about the link. I will share the link later on. So let me finish this first, and then you can download that document. Okay, so what I was saying was the whole paper, the evaluation or criticizing of a research article can be done across a number of dimensions. So starting from the title, the author, the keywords, the abstract, introduction, research methodology, research findings, discussion, conclusion, and even the reference list. So everything is a potential option or a target for you to evaluate. So, and this is another way of looking at it is as a reviewer. So if you are writing a paper and I am the reviewer of your paper, I will probably follow these same steps that are shown here. You know, these steps will show, if I have to, when I do a review of an article, I will follow these steps as well. So I will look at the title. to see whether the title is clear or not. I'll see whether the authors they have published in the similar area or not. So that is the whole process of doing a critical evaluation of a research article. So let's go step by step. The title. Does the title clearly indicate what the research is about without being too long or too short? So that is the first thing. Is the title clear? Whether by reading the title, I can understand what is the main contribution of the paper or not. Are all the variables or theoretical issues stated and any relationships between them? So defining a title itself is a art, and you will see good research papers do this very well. So if you're picking up a paper from a highly ranked journal, well reputed journal, you will see that that title is very it tells you a lot. Okay, so that is the first bit, that is the title. The next bit is the authors. So in terms of authors, one of the things that reviewers do, and even I do on most of the occasions, is if I get a paper to review, and if it is not double-blinded review, which means I can see the name of the authors, but the authors cannot see who is the reviewer. In that case, the first thing that I will do is I will search for the author in Google. I will see if they have a Google Scholar page or not. Which is one of the reasons that in the first session I asked you that you should set up a Google Scholar page if you can. If you cannot set up a Google Scholar page for some reason, or if I cannot find a Google Scholar page for that author, I will then look whether they have a LinkedIn profile or not. Yeah, so that is another thing that you can do. If you cannot set up Google Scholar, set up a LinkedIn profile, and look at some of the experts in your area, look at their LinkedIn profile and see what all information they provide. So you have to try to cover all those aspects. Or if you are submitting a paper to a particular journal, look at the editors or editorial board of that journal and see their LinkedIn profile. What all information they have, because that is the information they are most likely to see when they browse through your profile. And also keep a very professional looking photo on your LinkedIn profile or any professional platform that you are part of. So that is the second step in terms of reviewing, in terms of critiquing. So when you are criticizing or evaluating a research paper, you are in fact behaving or acting like a reviewer. Yeah, so you are taking up a research paper and you're looking at it and saying, okay, what is it? What's good about this? What is the good things about this article? What are the not so good things about the article? So you are in fact in this process of evaluating a research paper, you are acting as how the reviewers would be acting, and that is the kind of detail you have to give when you are reviewing or criticizing an article. The next thing is keywords. Are the keywords informative and relevant to the paper or to the article that you're reviewing, or is it just some random articles? Because all these things are clues that tell how diligent the author has been when they wrote this article. So these are all cues that reviewers look for, and you, when you're evaluating a paper, you can look for. Many times when I read the paper, the title is not clear, the keywords really don't make sense. It just goes to show that the authors or the research team that has written that paper hasn't given a good thought about what they are writing. It may be just done in a rush, or could be any number of reasons. Next, look at the abstract. The purpose of the abstract, and I think we covered that in the first session as well, where I told you that the abstract has to be very clear and it has to be very structured. So you can start off with, you can when you're looking at criticizing a paper, look at the standard guidelines, or what I taught you in the first webinar on how a abstract should be written. Does it explain the purpose of the paper clearly? Does it explain why the research was carried out, what was accomplished, what were the findings, what is the significance of this research, and what conclusions were arrived by doing this research? Were there any practical implications that are mentioned in the abstract? How thorough was it? So all these are the things that you can review and learn from by looking at the abstract. Okay, so that was the first bit of evaluating the literature based upon looking at the title, the keywords, the profile of the authors, and also uh, looking at the abstract. So it may seem quite a daunting exercise if you have to do all these things for all the papers that you are going to review or include as part of your systematic literature review. But the thing is, that is what is required. Yeah, that is why it is called as a systematic literature review. And when you read such a document that has uh, so when I pick up a document, I can easily figure out the amount of effort that the authors or the team have put on when making that when preparing that article. So if it is very easy to find out an article which is very superficially written. Many a times the authors, or especially with the early career researchers, there is a rush to publish a lot of articles. So quality goes down as quantity goes up, because in the end there's only so much that you can do in a given amount of time. So time, quality, and cost can time, quality, and cost will not you cannot achieve all the three things at the same time. I got a message saying that no audio. Can everyone listen to me? Am I audible? Okay, I believe I am, so I'll continue. All right, now let's go to the next section, which is on introduction. So we are now evaluating or criticizing the literature. We are now evaluating the introduction and the literature review. So let's see what we should look in those sections. So when I'm reading the introduction, it should tell the reader that what is the main theme of the paper. It should give a sense of what the study is. It should introduce the question or the research problem. They should provide some development or the background study and state the purpose and the rationale. So when you're looking at any paper that you're reviewing for your literature review, ask these questions, these three from the introduction. Is the research question or problem researchable? So that is the very first and important part, because if the topic of research is not very useful, not relevant, then why read the rest of the paper? You can skip the paper right away. Is the problem important enough to justify the research? Because undertaking a research, like I said, is a costly exercise. There are a lot of people that are involved. There is a lot of resources that you need to apply to make research. So is that problem important to kind of spend that time on doing that research? And is the background that is provided in the introduction section relevant to the research question or not? So these are the three questions you can ask, or you can look for these answers to these questions when evaluating the introduction of any paper that you are reading or evaluating or criticizing. The next thing is literature review. The literature review should give an overview of the available literature. Many a times I see research papers where the literature review kind of doesn't relate to the core contribution of the paper. Many a times it is just seems like at the very last minute somebody has just searched in Google Scholar, find out a few references from the top 10 things, included that in your reference list, and came up with a literature review. It's very obvious and it's very clear that that is what has happened. So this is one thing that you can easily pick up when you are looking at literature review, when you're reviewing a paper and the literature review section of that paper. So a good literature review should be very coherent and should contain, should give you enough information that justifies the reason for undertaking this research. So when you're doing this, you can ask yourself these questions. Is the literature review broad, or it is yet focused on the issue? Is the historical as well as contemporary material put in the area of the area is put in context? So many a times I see papers which only have the literature that is in the last 4 or 5 years, and the reason for that is, like I said again, the example is it may have been done in a rush. You quickly searched in Google Scholar and searched between the last 5 years because you think that is where the literature would be, but that may or may not be the case. Some really good papers or seminal papers could be present in the last 10 years or last 15 years. So if you do not pick that up, you know that you have not done a good job. And when you are reviewing or criticizing the literature, you can pick that up. You can say that the literature is not thorough enough, it is not sufficient. And you can even pick up examples of these papers that should have been included but are not included in the literature review. Then you can look at, does it fairly represent opposing views? So what happens on many occasions is authors would find existing literature that supports what they are trying to do. So if they are proposing a framework, a model or something, so they will find existing literature that says that this is the right way to do, or this is the right thing, or and so on. But a good literature review should also present opposing views, something that says that no, this is not the only view in the literature. There are other authors that show that present something different. And today in the case studies, I will show you some examples of that. In the end, normally what I like is a literature review should conclude, the last paragraph of the literature review in any empirical paper should conclude with a research gap. Okay, what is the gap in the research and how your research kind of fills that gap. So that is what is required when you are doing a review of the literature. So you can see how much effort is required to criticize or synthesize good research article. And in the examples, in the case studies I will show you today, that after reading all of this, it may only be 3 or 4 sentences, or at sometimes even 1 or 2 sentences that come up as a review that goes into your research in your literature review. Okay, the next we are going to evaluate, next that we are going to look into is how to criticize, evaluate, or review the aims of empirical study as well as the research design. So let's look into it now. Like I said at the beginning, that in the introduction as well and in the abstract, the aim of the research must be clearly stated. Yeah, it has to convey the main purpose of the study. So when you read when you read a research aim or objective of a research paper, do you understand what the researchers are trying to do, what the study is trying to achieve? If that is not clear, you can say, by reading this article, it was not clear to me as to what the study was trying to achieve. Many a times there could be there could be a gap between what the authors have mentioned as the aim plus versus what has been given as a outcome. So that is one thing also you can pick up. The next thing to evaluate or criticize is the research design. So in this section, you should clearly state what the researcher did, how it was done. So we are talking about the research methodology section here. So when you look at when you saw the research the webinar 3 that I did last week, we spent a lot of time only on one section of your research paper, which is the research methodology section. And the reason to spend so much time to do that is when your paper is later reviewed by a reviewer or criticized by other researchers, they find very minimal evidence or very minimal uh, points to target, because you have covered literally everything that is required to be reported in that section. So if you have done a good job, it will be very hard for a reviewer or another researcher to criticize your work in this section. Similarly for the introduction as well as the abstract, which we covered in the first webinar. The methods section of the research design usually has a subsection where you describe how many participants were there in the research, what materials did you use, how were the participants selected, was there any payment that was made to these participants to participate in the research, what was their demographic, what was their gender, age, affiliation, and so on. All this, a lot of this information has to be mentioned in the study. If it is not mentioned, it is easy for you to state in your review or in your criticism that we reviewed this article, however, we could not find how many participants were selected in the process or what was their selection process. And this is very important for this particular study because some reasons, blah, 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 something like that. Similarly, applying for ethics is very important in research, and if the ethics approval is not mentioned within the research document, it is something that you can also point out. In terms of the procedure, each step in the research should be explained. This includes any instructions to the participant, the formation of groups, any experimental settings, and so on. And what the reason why this is important, because when you are reading a review paper and when you want to find out the pros and cons, you need all this information. Without this information, you cannot make an informed decision. You cannot make an informed assessment of the research paper or of the research study. So if that information is not available, you have two options. One option is that you can either report in your study, in your review, that we could not find this information, it was not reported in the paper. Alternatively, like I mentioned in the last webinar 3, you can contact the authors or the research team and request that specific information that you need for your research paper. So if any information is missing, that is the way you can get that information back. So when you're doing this evaluation, the thing that you have to ask yourself is, these are some of the questions that you can ask to help you make your review clear, writing easy. So is there a clear rationale for the chosen research approach? One thing that I mean, this is not a study about writing a research paper, but if I do run such a session in the future, one of the things that is very important is to give a justification that the research approach that you have chosen to solve the research problem is the right one, because that is very important. Maybe some studies are very useful for doing a questionnaire based, like a quantitative study, whereas others are much better doing a qualitative study. So depending upon your research question, your research methodology should match. And if that match is missing or is not specified in the article, that is another option for you to give your critical opinion. Is the research method appropriate? Okay, I covered that. Was the collection of data appropriate for the research question? So that is another thing. I mean, you may have a good data collection, but does that data that you have collected actually helps you to answer the question or not? That is also should be evaluated and should be assessed. Is there enough information about the participants? Yeah, if yes, then you can mention that is good. If not, you can say that is ambiguous. Are there any limitations of the studies that were discussed? So all these things basically helps you to refine your report, refine your opinion about a particular research. And I strongly suggest that spend some time, some good time doing this, because once you write your research paper, your opinion of a particular research or research team goes into the public forever. You cannot get it back. So it is very equally important that when you are criticizing research, don't just randomly criticize for the sake of doing it, because your name is associated with that. So if you say something incorrect, it reflects upon you that you did not take enough effort to actually understand what their contribution was. So don't do this in a rush. Take sufficient time to do a good job. Okay, now let's move on to the data analysis section, and what is it that you can review here. So in the data analysis, or you can also refer to it as results and findings section, this is a section where the authors would provide their discuss their results. What did they find? How did they answer the research question? So when answering or when explaining their research, all the relevant information should be disclosed or should be discussed. Many a times I observe that many research papers do not mention some information, and this could be unintentional, or sometimes it is intentional. And the reason for that is they do not want the weaknesses of their studies being very obvious. However, what happens is it has a inverse effect. So when a reviewer is reviewing your article and they are expecting some information, yeah, I mean, if you look at the Prisma guidelines itself, when you look at the Prisma guidelines, and if you're imagining that the reviewer is expecting information across those 27 sections or categories, and specifically some information is missing from the review paper, and there is no justification or explanation provided in the article as to why that information is missing. So that is a red flag for reviewers. So many a times reviewers would pick up on those things. So if you know that your study has had some results which are not that favorable or not really good as you are expecting, it is always recommended that you mention that as a limitation of your study and that you would explore that in future. Don't try to hide that, because it is very easy to for experienced reviewers to easily pick that up. So when you are reviewing, when you are analyzing this research, what you also need to see is there any information that is missing? So if this is a research question, I was expecting this as a research, some of this information in the research. Why is that information not reported? And again, like I said earlier, you have the option to contact the authors that we requested to request this information in for your review article. Okay, so that was about analysis, data analysis and results. So when you are writing a review, think about these questions. What the steps involved in the data analysis explained and the strategies justified? Was the data analysis rigor enough to substantiate the claims? Were all the data taken into account? If some data was kind of excluded, then why was that done? Provide justification. So basically, by looking at this, even I explained in the webinar 3 that managing bias in your study is very important. So even when you are reviewing somebody's article, what you're looking at is the bias that may be there in their reported findings. So if they have reported some information and some information is missing, that is bias. So you have to find out the reason for that. If not, that can go into your review, critical review. Okay, so that was analysis. Next we look at the discussion and the conclusion section. Again, each and every section of the research article will have would have to be you can criticize each and every element of the study, but depending upon where you are going to write, how much space you have in the paper that you're going to write, you would have to be selective of what is it that you can write. But having gone through this process is really important. So let's look into the discussion section now. So basically, when you are evaluating the discussion section, make sure that there are no repetitions of points that are already made in other sections. So because that is, firstly, it reduces the readability of your article and also wastes the time of the reader and the reviewer. In the discussion section, we are looking for if the results have been interpreted properly or not, and that interpretation has to be from the point of view of the research question that is asked. So in today's case studies, I'm going to show you a few examples where this has been done very nicely. So what they have done is they have picked up a research question in the discussion section and replied to that research question. So that is a very nice way to kind of have a discussion section, because it is easier for the reviewers to follow as well as for the readers to follow as well. Have the conclusions or recommendations been appropriately drawn from the data analysis? So data analysis you have done, that's pretty straightforward, and they would have done. What you need to pick up from the discussion section is have these been done in the appropriate manner. Another thing that we look for, or you should look for, is how does it compare with the studies, with the other existing studies. Many times what happens is the results section is very well done. It shows that the results are very good. It achieved the research objectives and so on and so forth. However, what happens is, or what is missing is that there is no comparison of how your research findings, or how the research findings in a paper compare to what is there, what is out there in the literature. So that comparison is also a very strong element of your research paper that you should be aware of. Finally, moving on to the conclusion. When you're looking at a conclusion, what do we want to know? We want to know this was the research problem, this is how it was solved, this is what we got, the results, and these are the insights. So basically, that is what we are looking for when we are kind of evaluating the conclusion part. One of the things that you should mention in the conclusion is if there is potential for future research or the limitations of your study. Sometimes that could be a separate section. Sometimes it is also mentioned in the literature, in the discussion section. So discussion can have limitations and future work, or sometimes the that is mentioned in the conclusion. So depending upon wherever it is mentioned, you can look for that option, whether that has been mentioned or not. And if it is not mentioned, another option for you to make a comment or for criticize the literature. Finally, conclusion is not where it ends. You can also look at the research reference list of the paper. Okay, a lot of times, students, sorry, not students, a lot of times researchers would do a very good job in the writing the whole paper. Everything is perfect, but they do not put enough effort in looking at their reference libraries or reference list. And I had my personal experience in this situation when I had submitted a paper and the reviewer got back to me saying that there were standard comments for the whole of the paper, but specifically the reviewer picked up references in my reference list showing that those were incomplete. So they were, maybe if it was a conference article that I was referring to, the city or the country was not mentioned, or the page number was not mentioned. If it was a journal article, maybe the volume of this was not mentioned. And I was really surprised as to how that error could have happened in my article, because I'm very diligent. And it was a big learning experience for me. And I think I should also share that with you guys here is when you download the citation from Google Scholar, many a times it is incomplete. It's not incorrect, it is incomplete. So that was my big learning experience. So then what I did in response to that reviewer's comment, I had to go back and through all the research papers that I had cited in that article, go to the original journal page or the paper. So if it was Emerald, Elsevier, whichever paper it was, I had to individually go to that article and download the citation from there to my Zotero library. That way, I ensured that all the information was correct and was not missing. And if you think that it was a time-consuming exercise, it definitely was. It did take me a lot of time, and I think it was, I don't know, over 100 or so lists in my paper. And I could not take the risk of revising the paper and submitting it, and there was one paper that was incomplete or again incorrect, and the reviewer would say, see, I told you so, you still did not fix it. So I had to make sure that did not happen. So I had to kind of refresh my whole library and redo it. It took me a lot of time to kind of sort that out. But in the end, what happens is when you put in some effort, there is some returns that you get which you don't know you will get at that point. So for this paper, which was which was submitted to Information Technology and People Journal, happened to be selected as the best paper award, received the best paper award for the year 2018, I think, and I received the award in 2019. So just goes to show that there is no choice, there is no option for hard work. I mean, you need to put hard work, but also be smart next time. You learn something, then you apply it for the in the next instance. Okay, let me move on. What do we have next? Okay, so now I have a small activity for you. And the activity is to evaluate a research methodology section. Yeah, so pick up any paper that you are you're currently using in your study, and look at so this has to be a empirical paper, okay, not a literature review paper. So look at that paper and take say 10 minutes to evaluate the research methodology based upon the points that I just now gave you. Okay, I will take the screen back to the methodology section of the slides so you can see what information you should look for. And in the meanwhile, I will create a post on the community so that you can post your responses there. Okay, so what I'm looking for here is I would say maybe 3 or 4 sentences where you are giving your opinion about the research methodology section. Okay. Okay, so I want you to have a look at these questions. Ask yourself a bit here. Yeah. And pick up an empirical paper and try to write a commentary about the research methodology part of that research paper. Okay. Okay, have you finished writing a bit of a summary evaluation for the literature research methodology section for empirical paper? If you have, can you post it on the community so I can see? If you need some more time, then just leave a comment for me so I know and I can continue. We will start in 2 more minutes. I'll give you 2 more minutes to finish off. Okay, I think you probably need more time, so I can leave some feedback or comments once you post it after the session. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so I want to cover this one slide here, which talks about where I talk about paraphrasing. So when you have done all these activities or the process that I mentioned for looking at different studies and looking at the different sections of the research paper, and then trying to write or trying to identify the weaknesses or of the paper. What you next need to do is you have to write that up, either in a sentence or in a paragraph or in a paper, depending upon where you are going to submit. So the best way to paraphrase, and you can read this in detail as well later, is review your summary notes, whatever you have done, rewrite them in your own words in complete sentences. Use reporting verbs and phrases like the author describes or Smith argues, and so on. And if you are using exact text, make sure that you put that in double quotes. So that is very important and critical to use double quotes if you're picking up sentences as it is. Otherwise, it would be considered as plagiarism. So you want to avoid that. Okay, so the next bit is the next question that you will have is how long should the review be for each article? And the answer is it depends. So it depends. It can be anywhere from a few sentences to a paragraph long, or it could be even more, or it could even be actually shorter than that. And we will see some examples today in the case studies where the only thing that you see is from one paper, there's only one article, one sentence that comes up as a review or as a summary. Many a times it is not a review as such, sorry, not a critical review, but it is more of a summary of their contribution or the purpose of that research. That is what you would see in the paper. When you are writing literature, so now we are moving from the next phase kind of. So first what we did was the first thing that we did in the today's session was when you pick up an empirical paper, when you want to review it for your systematic literature review paper, what information you should find out from that paper. So we looked at titles, abstract, introduction, all the different headings to get that. However, what I'm going to explain you now is you have to now kind of categorize or group your literature in some way or some form, so that maybe if you include say 100 papers in your study, in your literature in your literature review, you have to group it in say 5 categories, 6 categories, or 10 categories, whatever that number may be. And what are the different ways how you can group that? Because that is a question that probably comes up. You will get quite a lot. So I'm going to show you two examples or two approaches of how this can be done. So first is to identify a framework for your research synthesis or research or categorizing your research. And identify a framework means something that is already out there in the literature and you are using it. Okay, so you're not coming up with your own framework. The second one is to build an evaluation framework and synthesis framework of your own, which means you come up with your own kind of a category or a template for dividing the literature into different categories. So I'll go through a few examples of both the types. So the first approach is identify a framework for research for your synthesis. Let's take this as an example. This is a research framework for cybersecurity. Okay, it is designed by NIST in US, and it has 5 elements or 5 components: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So if I was writing a research paper on some aspect that involves cybersecurity, so I could use this as a framework. And in fact, 2 of my current students are working on implications or applications of blockchain and cybersecurity. So they have in fact found this framework, and they are going to use this framework to write their systematic literature review. So for them, there are say these 5 categories. When they did their literature search, they would identify which papers kind of fit in any of these categories. There could be overlap as well. Maybe a paper fits here as well as here. That's perfectly fine. That's not an issue. But you need some way to kind of uh, group your literature so that it is easier for the reader to understand and also for you to write when you're writing your research paper. So this is one example. This example you probably may remember. We used it in the case study, one of the case studies in the third webinar. So there are 6 categories here: recovery, preparation, compounding, feedstock, printing, and quality. So an existing framework that is there in the paper, that you can use that to group your literature. This was also an example from a paper on marketing that we studied in the last webinar, webinar 3. Again, you can see different categories in which where the literature has been categorized. So that was the first approach, where you use an existing framework and build and categorize your research according to that. The second approach could be or is where you build your own categories, your own taxonomy, or we can call it as an evaluation or a synthesis framework. This is where there is nothing out there that you can directly apply, and you have to then decide that, okay, I now have to do something myself. So this is an example from one of my paper, which I did with one of my student. And this paper was a literature review paper, and we designed or developed a taxonomy for prosumer smart grids. So we divided it into prosumer communities and prosumer relationships. And within that, we had sub categories. So definitions, prosumer roles, and so on and so forth. So how did we come up with this? So that was a exercise in itself. I'm not going to cover that in here today because that is a topic on its own. But what I'm trying to say here is that you have 2 options. One is to use an existing framework, or the other is to come up with your own framework. So this is an example of coming up with your own framework. To give you a brief idea how we can come up with something like this is when you are collecting or gathering your research articles for your systematic review, you can start thinking about, okay, this paper kind of fits in this area, or I want to create one category, which is category A, category B, category C, and start putting those papers in those categories. And then as you read more and more papers, you will start to realize that, okay, I think these 2 categories are kind of similar. Let's merge them. And after this iterative process, you will kind of come up with a model that you think you can use, or your framework that you can use. So this framework translated into a table looks like this. So on the left, you can see all the different items which are from here, or the categories which are from here, all these categories. And on the right side here are the papers that belong to each of the category. So this is another framework. So this was the paper that I was referring to, where I had that reviewer write me about the references. So in this paper, we studied the existing literature and came about with this process, the process of how customers engage with your brand. And to come up with this process or this flow or these items in that framework or that model took us a fair bit of time. We had to read a lot of literature. We had to group the literature in different categories. We had to find evidence that these are the seven models that exist, and this is the order in which that models or the engagement happens, and so on. So coming up with a model itself is a very challenging and a time consuming but a very enjoyable experience. So now if you see here, I have mentioned that I have built this framework, I have built this model, but others can now use it. Okay, so if you are a marketing researcher and you want to apply, do a systematic review, say maybe this paper was published in 2018, I think, 2018 or late 2017. 5 years from now, if somebody wants to do a systematic review on customer engagement, they can come and they pick up my model, then say that Vidy and his team had proposed this model for customer engagement. I want to see what is the literature out there now along all these dimensions. And they could come up with a systematic review paper which summarizes and criticizes literature for each of these elements. And I think this answers your question, Diane, where you said, how do you search for an existing framework? So this is an example of how you can find an existing framework. If there are some studies in your field that are working on something that you are working on, you can find and use those if you think they are relevant. Okay, so that finishes the first bit of the session today. It took a bit longer than an hour. So what I want to do now is I want to share with you one thing that I am planning to explore, which is I want to run a 3-minute competition, 3-minute research competition. So what does this mean, or why do I want to do it? So what I want to do in this 3-minute competition is give you the opportunity to present your research in a very in 3 minutes, basically. So if you know, there is a very well-known competition that is run around the world. It's called a 3-minute thesis, or 3MT. So I want to run a variation of that, which is, I don't know what to call it, but it could be a 3-minute competition for your SLR. So what I want you to present, or if you're interested in participating in this competition, is you have to either send me a 3-minute video, recorded video, that answers some of these questions, all of these plus even something more, whatever you can cover in 3 minutes. Very clearly explain what your research is, what did you find, what was the problem, how big was the problem, and so on. Okay, or you can present it live with me. So I can get you so I could get you side by side next to me, so you can come join this platform with me, and you would be seen next to me, and you could do your 3-minute of your research presentation. So I can give you both the options to do it. So yeah, it is not compulsory. It is something I thought we could do after the 5th session. So when we finish the 5th session, we can run this competition, and we can run this. So if you are interested, I will create one page on the community, and if you want to participate, just reply to that thread that you will participate, and I would need to, and tell me whether you would like to send me a video which I can play here, and or if you would like to do it live. Either way is fine. And we will then ask all the researchers to vote who thinks who was the best, and then we will have a few winners from this competition. So I thought this would be something interesting to engage you as well, to bring you online, because quite a few of you mentioned that you wanted to have a more interactive kind of session. So this could be a way for to have that activity. So if you're interested, do let me know. All right, we now open up for the first Q&A session. If you have any questions, please post them now so I can take them up. Okay, Uma, your question on how is Zotero compared to Mendeley, I actually cannot answer that because I do not use Mendeley myself. I've been using Zotero for a long time, but I have heard good things about Mendeley. So if anyone in the community or anyone who is online right now has experience with both, then probably they could comment on that. But both are basically, from what I imagine, is reference management, and there are many more other than those two. Are there any more questions, or shall I progress further? Thanks, Venkat, for clarifying that. Okay, John, you can post it as well yourself if you like, whenever you that others, so that others can reply to that as well. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I will continue. And if there are any questions, then we can come up. I'll pick it up later on. Okay, this actually brings us to break, a 5-minute break. But I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our ambassadors for the community. You all have been very helpful, and in promoting the program, promoting the platform. And without you all, we would not have reached the total number of people that we have on the community. So I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all for all our members, to all the ambassadors. And also want to tell those that are online that it is fairly easy to uh, become an ambassador. You would have to use the uh, invite link from the mobile app to invite your friends. You can just fairly easily do that. You can then become a bronze member to start with, then silver, and then gold. So thanks all of you. Thanks everyone who have been working, who have helped this community grow. So we'll take a few minutes break here, and then we will start. In the meanwhile, if you think of any questions, please do post them here. Okay, let's begin the next session, next part of the session today. So in this session, we are going to cover a few case studies, look at some existing papers and how they have synthesized their research. I've seen some questions that have come up in the comments. So Rodrigue, you asked, is the framework you have just shown going to be presented in the methodology? Yes, you can mention that you would be using a methodology. You would be using your a selected framework in your methodology, or when you're going to start your synthesis. So some papers mention it in the methodology, some can mention it elsewhere. So you can you have the flexibility to decide where to write it. Next question is from your garage. Please suggest how the literature review section is written in the thesis. So I think it is pretty much the same. There is no major difference in how the paper, how the literature review is written for a thesis. So if you follow all the webinars on this systematic literature review writing, the literature review section, literature review chapter of your thesis would be similar. In Arnie, I did share the link up earlier, so you may just want to check that link. So this is the link from where you can download that paper. It's up in the chat box. Okay, so let's move on. So the first case study that I want to start with today is this research paper which is in the marketing space on sustainable fashion. So I covered this paper in the last webinar as well. So in today's webinar, in today's session, we will look at more about the how they have written their findings section, how they have synthesized their literature, and the one and how you can learn, or you can see how this section is written and learn from that. Okay, so to begin with, this paper, like I mentioned, is the topic of this paper is sustainable fashion, current and future research directions. So this paper actually does not mention systematic literature review in the title, but in the abstract you can see a systematic review is mentioned. So this paper starts by giving an example of defining sustainable fashion. So this is probably one of their findings from the literature review is how has the research world defined sustainable fashion, and what are the different researchers, academics who have mentioned some ideas. So something like this you can also use in your write-up, whatever your concept is that you are going to write about. So sustainable fashion really started to appear in the management literature around 2008 with pioneering works from these authors. So you can apply something similar in your writing as well. However, more than 10 years on, an agreed upon definition of sustainable fashion is still elusive. These two authors have mentioned that. Offering a precise definition is beyond the scope of this paper. So they have also mentioned what is not part of their paper. This paper, so the contribution or one of the findings, forwards the view that sustainable fashion includes the variety of means by which a fashion item or behavior could be perceived to be more sustainable, including environmental, social, slow fashion, reuse. So these are some of the concepts that are now coming up if you look into it. The working definition was formulated through a synthesis of emerging definitions. So this is their contribution. So it is not a defined definition, agreed upon or accepted. It is a working definition, which means it can still evolve as it progresses. Sustainable fashion from a consumer perspective was referred by these was studied by these authors. So although this is not like a synthesis of literature, but this is an example of some things that you can write in your paper as well about a particular concept and who has worked on that concept. Okay, so consumer perspective was studied by this. Other researchers looked at a macro approach and then some examples. Some others looked at ethical fashion, slow fashion. Some touched and also look at the words and that are used to describe. So you can kind of imitate or you can kind of use these words when you are writing as well. So your writing also improves in quality. This was touched upon by Reynolds et al. So touched upon by is something interesting way to write. Although academia views sustainable fashion as both social and environmental, uh, consumers primarily define sustainable fashion using environmentally friendly language. Amanpreet, this is the paper that I used in the last webinar as well. You can get links to all the papers that I'm using in the case study from the webinar 3 on YouTube. Just pick up that. I cannot copy and paste it now during the presentation, but I've kept the same paper so you can easily get it for later. Uh, okay. Next, if we move on, now they have, as illustrated in table 3, sustainable fashion is not academically synonymous with slow fashion or eco fashion. So slow fashion is studied by these authors, eco fashion by these authors. Sustainable fashion is most closely related to ethical fashion, which is reflected in the overlap of the literature. So overlap of the literature is a very important word here or a phrase here. And then the overlapping literature is shown here. Then some definitions. Jorgens 2006 suggests that ethical fashion can be defined as this. However, sustainable fashion has transformed the while into the more flexible and or. So again, different references. So what I want to show you here is how the authors of this paper have picked up small concepts, small ideas from different papers and have synthesized like a story. You know, it is not like author 1 says this, author 2 says this, author 3 says this. That becomes very boring and it is not synthesized well. So this is a very good example of how you can um collect ideas from different things and write a story. See, this also I like very well. This sentiment is also shared by another author. So you are now comparing different authors. It is not just one author saying this, but it is multiple authors agreeing upon. Now, I think some of you asked me a question on the community as to if we are doing the literature, reviewing the literature, sorry, what kind of tables should I come up? How many tables I should have? So to answer that, there is no fixed answer for this. You know, it depends upon what you research, what you're researching, and what do you think is important for you to put it in a table and communicate it with your audience. So the way to kind of learn from this, the way to um kind of identify how many tables you need or what you need is looking at what other research papers in your field to see what they are kind of reporting and then incorporate that in your review. The other option which I will show you later third part of today's session is how you can come up with a kind of a layout or a structure to evaluate literature and then use those and come up with some tables. Okay, so in this example, they have got some definitions. Yeah, so definition from ethical fashion, eco fashion, slow fashion, and sustainable fashion, plus the actual definition and the references. So when I look at this table, I feel that this is something useful, because this paper is about evaluating the definition or coming up with the current state of the art of how a particular concept is defined. This is a very good example. I remember, I think one of you is doing research on the concept of adoption or innovation, I think, over the last 100 years. So if you are doing that, this paper is a good example for you to follow, because what they are doing is they are looking at how the term has evolved. So if you're writing a paper on innovation or how the concept of adoption has kind of evolved over a 100-year timeline, you need to know what are the different definitions that are out there, proposed by different academics, and get that and come up with one table. Is one example is like this table. Okay, let's see what's next. So here I like one sentence here. In commencing this systematic review, we provide the following figures and tables exploring the dominant fields of the sustainable fashion literature. Figure 2, which I think this is the figure 2, demonstrates the growth of research across the field in general. So starting from 2000, there was little bit of articles, but then you can see a sudden jump around 2016, 17, and so on. Figure 3 is a new conceptual framework. So figure 3 is this figure, and this figure is okay. So this figure 3, is a result of the study that these authors have done and identified or grouped the literature into different circles or bubbles here. And one interesting part of this is the size of this bubble is reflective of the number of papers that are talking about that concept. Okay, so consumer behavior 130 is the biggest bubble, whereas future leaders only has 12 papers, is the smallest bubble. So this is another kind of a graphical way to represent your literature in a table or in a figure. So the previous figure maps the field of sustainable fashion across 7 clusters that emerged from the analysis. So these 7 bubbles is kind of the framework that are used. It is used in this study, and they have come up with this framework. So they are not using existing framework. It has been organized along radical pragmatic change and production consumption continuum. So pragmatic change and pragmatic change versus radical change, producer versus consumer. So that is the kind of 4 quadrant that they have come up with to categorize their literature. This framework aims to help the reader understand the complexities and challenges of sustainable fashion. So what is the purpose of this framework is not just to group the literature, but the underlying objective is that this is a very complex field and we need some way of making it simple for people to understand. So that is what this framework achieves or aims to achieve. Table 4 offers detailed description of each of these clusters. So an example of what table you could use. One table could be, if you have a framework that either you have come up with or you are using an existing one. This one of the that could be one of the table that you can come. So one table could be equivalent to the uh, framework that you have. And if you remember the example of the that I gave you for my paper on prosumer and smart grids, I had the framework that was like a chart, and then there was a table underneath with the items on the left and the individual papers on the right. So that is an example of something that you can come up with. So let me see if there is table 4. Yeah, I think this is the table 4, and you can see the different items here: supply chain, SRM, consumer behavior, sustainable model, social media, social marketing, consumer practices, future leaders. So in this table, what is being conveyed is uh, what is the characteristic of that bubble or that group, what is their focus, and what are some of the key research papers in that box or in that bubble. So that is, you can think of creating a similar table for your paper. Okay, so table 5 illustrates the methodological approaches most prevalent in each cluster. So this is another way of representing some information in a table. Let's look at that now. So qualitative, quantitative, mixed, 3 different methodologies. And on the left, you can see those clusters or those bubbles. So which ones have used which kind of methodology, you can represent that in a table as well. If you look at this note at the bottom, although 465 articles have been incorporated in this review, 500 are presented here to accommodate articles which addressed multiple fields. So it is very likely that one particular paper might have addressed multiple problems or multiple challenges which kind of fit in 2 or 3 different categories. So which is why here when you tally up those numbers, they don't add up to 465, but they go to 500. So if that is the situation in your case as well, you could mention that too. Okay, then here they also relate it to the figure previously. Okay, so if you see this figure, there was hardly, I mean, just a little bit of research that was going on, but then suddenly there is a peak. How could you explain that? Why did that happen? Why did researchers suddenly start to research this area? So in this case, they say that it is why there has been a sudden such a rapid increase is difficult to pinpoint. However, they have given 2 examples here. One was the factory collapse in Rana Plaza in 2013 and the launch of the Fashion Revolution Week 2014. I think these are some of the how to say, the events, some events in that industry that triggered the interest of academics and researchers to kind of start researching this area. You can also mention if you have the collected information, like the existing literature is dominated by Western voices, which means studies have primarily come from these countries. But uh, if it is relevant to your research, okay. Uh, Similarly, they have another table which is examples of characteristics leading to purchase intention. So some studies and their relevant references. This I think I covered in the last webinar. It was about inclusion and exclusion criteria. This also, so I'll skip this. All right. This is another kind of a table that you can incorporate in your study. And what this is showing is what are the areas for future research. Yeah, and this is very important. And basically, by looking at the this figure, when they evaluated these number of papers in a particular segment or a particular research group, what are the future research directions in this, similarly for this and this. So that is one very valuable contribution of a systematic review. So that could also, so you could represent that as a table. So what happens, when you read more and more papers in your field, you start to get an idea of what is it that you can report in your systematic review. Because basically, you got to think what is important, what will add value to my audience, to my readers, to the researchers in this field. And if we can kind of package that information nicely in different tables, different figures, it just makes the whole improves the readability of your research and the interest that readers get. And also, I think it is one more thing that is important here is, if you have a very nicely written article, you will not just nicely written but also with strong research findings, you will also get very good number of citations for this article. So if one of the objective that you have is to increase the citations of your research, I think writing a good systematic literature review that is very thorough, you know uh, what happened, I mean, if you look at this paper, they evaluated 465 papers in their study, which means by reading one paper, I can get the information of reading 465 papers. So how much of a time saving is that for me? So someone has spent a lot of time and studying that many number of papers and synthesized the whole information for me to read in, I don't know what, 25 30 pages that may be there in this article. But that is value, and when somebody reads that, they will know that this is a good paper, and they will cite it. So that gives you very good citations as well. So this is the second paper, second case study. Again, the link to this article is there on my previous video, so you can fetch it from there. So here, I think there was, let me just quickly check. No. Okay, so if I remember correctly, in this paper, the section 3.1 on circular design improvement was about, it was part of how they have structured this paper. So here I want to highlight, or I want to show how they have written the synthesis. So as reported in table 2, the common purpose justifying the adoption. So this table 2 is about what is the purpose or for adoption of DFX. And then you can see these many references are referring to this table or to this section. If you look at individual one now, Baker et al. Explored how product design can more proactively address product life extension and product recycling. So this sentence, 3 lines, is telling the contribution of this author. Okay, so in a literature review paper, this is an example of, say, one paragraph of information about one paper. So whatever we covered today in the first whatever we covered today in the first session, which was what all things how you can evaluate and criticize a research paper, all that has come into this one paragraph. Okay, so this one paragraph covers what was the objective, whether the title was given correctly, whether the information that they mentioned in the research methodology was substantiated, the results were good or not, was anything missing. All that information is coming in just this one paragraph. So this is what is the thing that you are to expect when you are going to write the literature review, when you are going to write a summary or a critique of one particular paper in your systematic review. So based on the waste framework directive, so they are using a framework, existing framework. They selected 3 main strategies: recycling, prevention, reuse, and recycling. In order to address one of these 3 strategies, it is important to realize how to define product lifespan. The challenge is to determine when to apply which product life extension. So they mentioned the challenge. For this reason, they proposed a methodology. So this is their contribution. They proposed a methodology for optimal product lifespan, applied it to 2 case studies. So we're talking about methodology here, on a domestic refrigerator and a laptop as a use case. So what is missing in this synthesis? What I do not see here, what I can see here is they have mentioned what is the problem. They have mentioned the framework that they are using. They have mentioned the challenge that is being addressed. They have mentioned the proposed methodology. What is not mentioned here is the weaknesses or the some of the issues with this method, or a comparison of this approach with something else. So that is missing. You could include that when you are doing your review. And it may be that it is mentioned somewhere else in the paper, but I may not have read because I have not read the entire paper. But by looking at this sentence, this paragraph that is here, I cannot see that information. Let's move on to some other parts of this paper. So this author explored how DFS approach evolved, grouping the design approaches. So what is that they have done? In the PSS context, researchers considered environmental and economic approaches. In this dimension, also systematic design was introduced. Monero proposed a conceptual framework, so that is their contribution. Starting from the analysis, extant literature, based on the DFX approaches taxonomy by this, they detected 5 main circular design strategies. So you're using an existing framework that is proposed in some other article. I found in this paper there is a reference to he and she in the write-up, which I normally do not see, but it was interesting to see a reference to he or she in this. I would recommend that you just use the citation, that is Sudin 2004 introduced, or Hultgren 2012 obtained, like that, rather than saying he or she. One sentence that I like, or what you can incorporate in your writing, is here. Pigoso, through a systematic literature review, identified something. or these authors provided 10 guidelines for design, and so on. Allwood discussed four main strategies. So you can see like what are the common terms that are used to describe a study: created guidelines, discussed strategies, provided guidelines, through a systematic literature review, identified something, and so on. So try to use these style in your writing if you like. Similarly, Bovia 2004 reorganized something. In addition, other new design guidelines were proposed. They also presented a methodology. Methodology was applied on 12 case studies. Rocha proposed an analytical framework, investigated both literature and practice to explore DRM. So this is one interesting point I want to talk about. Sorry. Here. So this paper, Shoe and Flowers 1999, investigated literature and practice to explore this concept. So practice is very important here because, like I said in the one of the earlier webinars, that many journals do not like including uh, gray literature in the review papers. But this is an example of a study that is used in a systematic review that has picked up practitioner literature or gray literature. Uh, Similarly, Desai and Mittal 2003 proposed a methodology, conducted a review, illustrates. So start firstly when you're reading the paper now, the next maybe this week, if you pick up a few papers to read, empirical papers, I would like you to look at these terms, these words that are used in those papers, because you can learn from them and you can write like that. If you like some paper, the way it is written, try to learn from that, try to use that in your writing. Okay, so what tables do we have in this paper? So these are the three approaches. So this is their framework: circular design metrics. These are the different authors or their papers. Research type: case studies, action research, theory-based, framework, model, guidelines. So this is a kind of a representation of literature in a table. What is the next table here? So here they have a table which is on the purpose. So again, the same categories, different papers from a different perspective. Okay, so those were the two case studies. We have a few more case studies to go. I have put a Q&A session here. If you have any questions for so far of what I have covered. If you have any questions, please let me know. I can take some now, and then we can move to the few more case studies. Diane, which slide are you referring to? Is it this one, Diane? Do you have any question on that slide, Dan? Any other questions from anyone else? Okay, so I don't see any more questions coming up. Link of the paper. Mariam, how can co-authors collaborate on formulating the synthesis? Okay, so it's a very interesting question, Mariam. What we normally would suggest is the first author or any author from the team comes up with a first version of the draft of the synthesis, and others can collaborate, contribute, or provide feedback and improve that synthesis. So depending upon how you are going to structure the paper or write the paper, excuse me, many a times it may happen, you may decide in the research protocol at the beginning that we will have um, these three authors, these are their roles and responsibilities. Author one would be involved in the downloading or selecting of the papers. Author two and three will review the paper list and so on. So whatever I covered in the webinar, in the third webinar, we will do that. And one of the things within that itself, you can mention that how is the writing going to be done? Who is going to be the lead writer and who are going to contribute to improve the writing and so on. So that way you can address that problem. So somebody has to take the lead. How far off years we should cover for SLR study? Is it totally up to us? Yeah, I mean, one thing is to look for what was the recent literature SLR in your area. What did they cover? How many years did they cover in their report or in their paper? And that could give you some idea. A good systematic review should at least be, I would say, 10 years or more. If it's just for a few years, then it does not really tell you a lot. So yeah, it depends upon your field and how active or how fast the field is progressing. Okay, any more questions? What's this? If she's asking about data extraction that can be done by two authors independently and then compared, a decision reached after decision in case of disagreement. I don't understand what you're trying to say, Uma. Is there a question there or are you just commenting? Santwana, is the bubble type of representation of results done in any specific software. I don't know whether they have used any specific software or, but what I can see from the figure is that it is relative size. So I don't know whether it is exactly relative or not, but the bigger ones are shown as bigger bubbles. The ones that are smaller are shown a little bit smaller. They may have used a software. I think if you read that paper in detail, you may be able to get that answer. Okay, I will move on. I think we're kind of running short of time today. Okay, so this is the third paper that I wanted to talk to you, discuss with you today. So in this paper, you can see there is, okay, this is the third paper. In this paper, you can see they have used a framework, 6 categories to divide their literature. And the literature writing part or the synthesis part is also has 6 sections. So each section refers to each part of this framework, and they have gathered or collected literature on, say, for example, recovery, and they have written about the recovery section. Here is an example of phase 3, which is compounding, which is this part here, which is about pigments, additives, and something. And this is the write-up for this section. So compounding phase step is related to the development of mono and composite materials. So the first line tells or introduces the concept or the component of the framework. And then some literature about different pigments and additives and different references for that. One of the main conclusions of these studies, so after introducing this, they're providing a conclusion that is derived. One of the main conclusions is the positive technical feasibility to use recycled monomaterials. Then if you move on to some literature, how they have synthesized some literature using recycled PET, Zander et al. 2018 argued that, so you can use the word or phrase like this, argued that printing processes was challenging. Potentially leads to another good phrase to use in your writing. Efforts need to be made in order to improve the printability. So something around the future work, what needs to be done in this. Okay, I think this one I already discussed. Some other things that came up which picked up quite nicely here is, we can pick up from this here is, this approach might be useful for, and then apply it in your writing. That this technical aspect can contribute to something. Metal composites using recycled were explored using something. Resulted in improved of whatever. Developed something. Obtained results for something. One of the main conclusions was something. If you look at another phase of the framework, the main goal of this phase is to. So again, starting the new section, new framework of your write-up, the first line gives or explains what is the main goal or theme. So I think if you see here, this part, again, I also told you the same thing. Compounding phase step is related to. So what is this about? Similarly, the feedstock. What is this component or the framework part about? What is noteworthy? It reduces costs, facilitates manufacturing, assembling, has proven to be an effective way to do something, presented an open source solution. So some more different types of words and phrases that you can use in the writing. Section 4.5. Again, the first sentence is giving a brief explanation about this category. The fused filament fabrication is well established in this industry. For instance, or time was reduced, was proved. This approach takes away the filament fabrication, which is time and cost consuming process. Important research path is to evaluate the printability of wide range. So this is future work. Look at a table that is used in this article. Again, you can see on the left here are the different categories of your research: recovery, preparation, compounding, relevant papers in that category, what aspect of that paper you are going to report in this table, application, quality, source, and so on and so forth. So another way to represent. And when you look at such a figure, look at such a table, and when you see either too many crosses or too many ticks, you can kind of find out where is there a lot of work that is happening. Another paper. All right, so this is the paper that I was referring to early on in the webinar, where I said that you can actually explain your results based upon the research question that you have. Okay, so here, this paper, they have this research question. And then they, by doing the systematic review, they have actually, by doing the systematic review, they have actually find out the answer to this review question, or to this to their research question. And you can see this is the question, and then there is a response. So that's also a very interesting way to kind of synthesize your results. In here, the writing of the literature synthesis, or the synthesizing or the criticism of the literature, is very bland, very simple. But I wanted to show you, because this is also something that you would find in different papers. So here, the purpose of the paper 5W is, and then they mention the purpose of this paper. The purpose of paper 7W was to investigate something. The aim of the empirical analysis presented in this paper was to do something. So here, each paper is like paper summary, paper summary, paper summary. So it's not very interesting to read, to be frank. It has to be more cohesive, and the synthesis has to be much more better. So basically, it has to sound like a story, so that if you are writing, when you're writing the literature, the evaluation or the criticism of the literature, it should sound like a story, not just a summary of what different authors did. So I would not say that author 1 did this, author 2 did this, 3 did this, and 4 did this. I would kind of think about how I want to convey the findings that these authors have identified. And that is actually a very time-consuming exercise, because you have to kind of say, pick up, this is the first article, right? What was their contribution? What was their findings? So you can, when you're reporting your synthesis, you could report it based on different aspects. So some of the papers that we discussed today, they use the framework to report. But another way to represent, and which we will do shortly, is looking at your literature review table and using that table as an example to write the synthesis. And I will show you a quick example of how or what that would look like, so you can get an idea that there are much better ways to kind of synthesize the story. So what I would do is I will not go through all the examples now, because that will take fair bit of time. I will quickly skip through the slides. So if you want to look at these slides later on in the video, you can pause it and see it and read it, or you can refer to the relevant paper. Again, look at these articles or look at these things carefully, because what I have done is I have highlighted some phrases or words that I like, and if you can use those kind of words or that style of writing when you're writing your paper. Another table here: main research streams, that is categories, observations, challenges, core insights, potential for future research. So this is a very powerful table. It tells me a lot about this field. Just by looking at this table, I can learn a lot more things rather than even reading the text that is behind. If you are going to start your PhD, I see a lot of students on these groups, online groups. They mention, ask a question. Excuse me. Ask a question. Tell me a research topic. What should I research on? I think that is a very you should not ask such a question. You, as a PhD researcher, or as a researcher for that matter, research questions are something that you have to identify by looking at the existing work that is out there, or you read some real good literature review papers like this, which highlight some of these open research directions. So that information is already out there. You just need to look for some papers and find that. Don't ask questions. Please tell me a research topic that I could work on. I mean, that just shows that you're not ready for a PhD or a research degree. Another very interesting table here showing the methodology that is used, what is the contribution, and the different areas. Another last case study. This was, I think we covered last time as well, where I showed they use different types of theories and assessed its implication on blockchain. Different theories, which authors or which studies used this theory. Future research questions are again quite nicely highlighted in this paper. Okay, so I will skip this Q&A now. What I want you to do is I want to show you something first in terms of one table that we can, one table that you could design and how you can write based upon that table. Okay, so if everyone can open up their Word document. So now I'm going to show you one example of a table that you can come up with, and this is fairly easy for all of you to come up, because this would be there this would be one of the easiest tables that you can design. Okay, so what we're going to have on this table is paper or citation of the paper, which may be okay, this is the, say for example, I have this paper in my review. What is the problem that this paper is addressing? So the purpose of the paper, it should be clearly defined or clearly mentioned in the research, either in the abstract or in the introduction. You can mention the problem very clearly here. Okay, so and try to use your own words, paraphrase it, don't copy it in this section, because we are going to use this in as a content of your paper. So I could say understanding online customer engagement is difficult, but companies need to understand this process. Okay, so this may be the problem statement. I don't remember exactly the problem statement that I had in that paper, but let's assume this was the problem. After reading the abstract, you synthesized the problem and you wrote it in this format. Okay. Then let's look at, if this is a problem, you can also have a research objective or research aim. What was their research aim? You can mention that here. The research objective could be to develop or to okay, so this could be the objective of this paper. Then we mention, then we say, basically, if you think about this, this is the headings that you would have in a structured abstract. Next could be solution. So what is it that they have developed? Was it a framework? Was it a model? Was it a process, or what? Whatever was developed. So based upon this, what were the findings? Oh, sorry, we can have okay, and I can also add one more. So here, what you can see now is I have taken one paper, and from that paper, I have identified this information. Yeah. So what is the problem? What is their research objective? What methodology did they use for the research? What solution did they came up with? What was their contribution? Solution slash contribution. What was their data collection? How did they do their data collection? What were their findings? And what were the limitations of this work? So I have done this for one paper. Yeah. So if in your systematic literature review, you have identified say 40, 50, 100 papers, you would need to add those here, each paper by paper. Okay. So for the sake of simplicity, I will just say copy, copy. Yeah. So let's assume that I have done this activity for all the papers that I have read. What I need to do next is so this in fact could be a kind of a framework that you can use for writing your literature. Okay. Now this one table is very powerful in it itself, because there is a lot of things that you can write about using this. Now let me show you how I can use a table of this sort to write the detailed literature analysis of your research paper. One of the interesting bits, you could do is all these columns that you have, they become subheadings of your research synthesis. Okay, excuse me. Okay, so one way is a very simple way, would be that I take this, and because I have filled up this column, this section of the paper, of this table, I can kind of pick up these three. So suppose these three problems, are different problems. Okay, so this is problem one. This could be problem two. Say, suppose this is a second problem. Hilda, I will come back to your answer, to your question in a minute. And this is, say, problem three, which is okay. Suppose these three are the research problems that different papers are addressing. I would take that problem here. And just for sake of simplicity or clarity, I'll just change the years. So I would say the literature on online customer engagement has evolved over the last 10 years. There are a number of problems being addressed by researchers in this field. For example, Potdar et al. 2020 focused on understanding online customer engagement. Understanding online customer engagement because it is difficult for companies to engage with customers, engage with their customers, and they need to know process to understand this. Okay, so this is one kind of, so it is like a starting of a story. Yeah. Now, if I have a lot of these problem statements in my table, I would need to figure out to group some problems together. Okay, so if this was one problem here, then I could say that similar so something like this. Similar ideas were also shared by John et al. 2019, where it was mentioned that something, yeah, whatever that thing is. And then add some joining sentences in between to kind of connect one problem to the other. And one thing you can also do here is look for kind of start writing the story from the earliest, lowest year. So if you're doing your systematic review from 2010 to 2020, start with 2010. So you want to show the evolution of the research. So some problems were there in 2010. Many researchers looked at that problem, studied that problem, and then gradually progressed to solve that. They mentioned the solutions that came up, and keep in mind, from here, you can pick up the solutions. Yeah. Pick up the problem, solutions came up, and then that created some other new problems. And then researchers looked at those problems. And then, so that is the kind of storyline that you have to kind of come up with when you are mentioning, when you're writing the, your synthesis. Okay, so there's one way is like this. So you write a section on problems. Then you say, you have another section on objectives, another section on methodology, solutions, data collection, limitations, and so on. But what I feel is that once you do that, it kind of feels very boring. You know, it seems very too structured, not the right flow in when you're reading it. Because when you're reading a problem that the researchers have picked up, you'd also kind of, your mind is also thinking about, oh, how did they solve it? What was the solution? You know, was that better than somebody else, or was it the good solution of all the solutions that are out there? So instead of then breaking down it into these kind of different categories, you can say, okay, this is a problem that I have already mentioned here. So what I would suggest is first mention all the problems. So you get that storyline of the problem sorted, and then come and add additional information after a particular problem. Okay. For example, I will just finish this. Okay, so now I'm connecting the second problem that is addressed in the literature. Other than engaging customers, so which is using this bit here, previous problem, companies also need to find out which customers to target for direct marketing, and then give some reason why, because this helps in this, and so on. Other researchers, a few other researchers have also pointed out this problem, and then give some references. Okay, and similarly, add the next problem and then next problem. So let's get the problem summarized, problem listed. So these are the problems, and this is the order in which the problems have emerged in the academic in this area, in this research. Okay, so now let's look at, say, the methodology. So we have the problem. We need to know now to address this problem. The authors have developed this using this methodology. So let's go back to here. Okay, so I mentioned this, where I mentioned the first problem and then mentioned the second problem as well. Okay, so let's come here. Sorry. You could now say that use 200 data samples to validate their model. In comparison to John 19, which only used say 25 or 100, for example, or 100 data samples. Now, this is the point where you can give an opinion, a comparative opinion. Okay. In my opinion, or you can say, what this points out is the rigor research rigor undertaken by as their data samples are substantially higher, and hence their findings can be more robust. Okay, so some things like that help you to relate and connect different studies to synthesize a very readable story. You know, it is not just author said this, second author said this, third author said this, and so on. So that's not how a good research, a summary looks like. Okay, or synthesis looks like. In my opinion, or you can also say in our opinion, or what this points out is, if you don't want to use I, we, our, then you can say what this points out is, and then give your opinion. Okay, so we have kind of covered this, we have done this. We know that we have built a solution which was here. We have covered the data collection bit. We have mentioned that the findings are robust. You can even further elaborate that findings if you want to go in further depth. And then finally, limitations. So if you want to mention the limitations here, you can also do that. So you mentioned this, then you can say, however, one thing to notice here is that this study only focused on banking industry. Hence, there is an opportunity to explore how this would work in another industry. Okay. So gradually, as you are doing this, you will build up the storyline. You will start connecting different dots. And this is a very late stage when you actually start writing. When you do this bit here, doing the table, you would spend a lot of time firstly to get this table in this format, but later you can also kind of create some groups of these tables in itself. So this grouping could be, for example, based upon the problem. So if the problem is related to direct marketing, yeah. So all the papers that are kind of similar to this problem or variations of this problem, you put it under this heading. And then you can create another heading here. Influencer marketing. Any papers that go here in this category. When you're doing that, in fact, what you're doing now is within the problem section of your literature review write-up, you are creating subsections. So, for example, here I will go online customer engagement. Becomes one area. Then I have direct marketing, influencer marketing. So as you can see, what I've shown you just now is how you will kind of build up your research, your writing of the synthesis part. Okay, so come up with this table. This is very useful table to kind of get all your ideas out. So whenever you're looking at a particular research paper, you should aim to find out all these data elements from your from that paper, because they will then help you to write your research story very nicely. And eventually you will realize that these headings become the core headings of your research write-up. So as you do this, you will experience. I mean, as you gain more experience, you will be better at doing this. Okay, I'll take up the question by Hilda now. Should we separate the analysis regarding the approach, qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods? Yes. So what you will see in a lot of papers is, like in this case, I have done the study based upon the problem. You could go here, methodology, and you could structure the literature based upon qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methodologies. Okay, so instead of I could say qualitative studies are all in this group. These are quantitative studies. and these are mixed method studies. So you can, it is up to you how you want to report your literature in your paper. But there are some things that you do which is like kind of a practice in this space, and we should follow that. Okay, so we have remaining last 10 minutes. I will take up some questions from you on this, and yeah, we will conclude after that, after the Q&A. If you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, Inarni mentioned, thanks for showing the method of comparing or criticizing using the table. This is the skill that I've been looking for. Okay, that's good. Happy to see that. It is. I find that this is a very interesting way to kind of systematically collect data from each paper and use that for writing your literature review. Thank you, Dan. Okay, Hina, sir, this table should be included in the paper itself, or it will go in the appendix section. Yeah, I would not include this in um, the table as such here. Okay, I'll show you one thing that you can do. So this table itself can be used to derive multiple tables. Okay, so once you have this complete table done, you could do a table for methodology. Okay, so you will have different articles and different methodologies. So I'll quickly show you one example. If I say kind of copy this. Okay, so from that first table, which was this, if you pick up one column and showcase the same table, for example, this is the table for, call it, the methodology is used in these columns, you can put the information here. So if it was a qualitative methodology, you can say interviews, how many interviews were there, interviews conducted. Quantitative, maybe how many questionnaires were sent. And if it was mixed methodologies, mixed methods, you can say which was done first, qualitative, then quant, or the other way around. So this will give more detailed information about this particular, from the methodology point of view of all these things. You can again also keep those divisions, the categories here. For example, this was online customer engagement was one category. We had direct marketing as one category. and then another way. So this is another use of making a table. Similarly, you could do a table for the data collection, for the findings, for limitations and future work. So a lot of table ideas can come out by just doing this one big table. Okay, a few more questions have come up. Are the columns of the table to be discussed under separate headings as written or under one subheading? Okay, so Santwana, the way I mentioned is you can start off with having different headings, see how your writing progresses. So, like when I started, I put problem, objectives, methodologies, and these different headings. You can have all this information, all these headings as well. You can put a table. For example, we did the methodology table here. I can cut the methodology and put the methodology table here, and I can give a summary or a critical evaluation of this table now, just the methodology table. Depends on what value you think you can derive by putting all these different categories. All this is not compulsory. So if you have kind of problem mixed with solution, which is what I have done in this sorry, I didn't realize the screen was not on. So what I did here was I took that table that we had designed and put it under the methodology section. Okay, so here again you can give some your synthesis from a methodology perspective. Yeah. You have to think about what value is it going to add. What will be your what information you think would people get or researchers get by looking at this kind of representation. So one thing that I could think of is you can compare different studies, qualitative versus quantitative versus mixed, and the thing that you could inform to your readers is, hey, look at this. When we did the qualitative studies, majority of reports, the research only interviewed 20 or 25, 30 people. And these were the results. Or you could relate back to the future research questions, yeah, which is in the limitations section. And you can say, our article or in this paper, we identify these 10 future research directions. If you were to take up this research, if you were to take up this research, one of the research questions that we have identified, what would we recommend as the appropriate methodology? So that could be something that comes up from this table or this section of the paper. So you are kind of recommending these are the research questions that we have proposed based on our literature. If you want to do this, we suggest the appropriate methodology would be this because of these reasons. So that could be a thing that can be useful if you're going to do the methodology table or methodology section. Okay, a lot of questions. One more question, sir. Can we compose our SLR from one scholar perspective that he or she has a lot paper on of one topic? I don't understand your question. So do you mean to say that in your systematic review, you will only include papers that are written by one author? If that is your question, then no, that is not the right way to do it. But if I understood it incorrectly, just clarify. Thank you to show. Thanks, Chiranjit. That's great. This is interesting. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Okay. Writing introduction, finding and discussion from related literature will be overlapping and repetition. Please explain how to avoid this. Discussion from related literature. I don't think that will be repetitive, because if you look at this table, and if I understand your question correctly, you are saying the findings would be repetitive. No, they will not be repeated, because these findings are for this paper and this finding is for this paper. So the findings will not be repetitive. Writing introduction and discussion. Introduction and discussion is not in this table anyway, so that will not be repeated as well. So if I did not answer your question correctly, maybe just give me some clarification on your question and then I can explain that. Defining categories need skill and experience. Yes, Arti, your question is right. And the way we do that is, it is a ongoing and evolving process. You can start by looking at the keywords that the authors have used to define their paper. And if they are well thought about keywords, those keywords are your starting point for thinking of the categories. But in the end, when you kind of read over the articles over and over, and when you kind of develop this table, you will get those ideas. And the reason to have multiple people in your team while writing the research paper is because you need that kind of discussion, to someone to talk to and share your ideas and uh, come up with those categories. Very interested and will be helpful. Okay, thanks, Roderick. By the way, Roderick, you wrote a very good article. So I've been regularly reading what all you have been sending to me. Those that I have read, and I think I have commented or provided feedback. If I have missed out on giving you any comment, just ping me again, send me a reminder, because there are so many responses on the community. I might have missed out on one or two. Okay, any more questions? Or otherwise, we can conclude this session. And for this week, I would like you to start designing this table. Fill up the table with the papers that you have identified from the last session, and come up with some ideas of what is it that you want to represent, and at least write the problem version for the storyline. Start with this part, problem plus solution. That will give you some ideas of writing out, get you started with the section 4 of this chapter of the paper. Ranuri, thank you. The table is very clear to understand. Okay, thank you. BB says, I'm asking about the whole paper writing. Okay, so I think if it is a whole paper writing, the introduction section will be how we cover. I don't know whether you attended the first webinar, but if you review my first webinar, I think I have covered the abstract and the introduction section and what you should write there. Regarding the discussion, that is the topic for the next webinar. So next Sunday, we will be talking about discussion. Okay, so looks like there are no more questions. So I think we can conclude today's session here. If you have any questions, please do write to me in the community. I will reply there. And also think about the 3-minute competition that I suggested. If you want to participate, start thinking about it. We will and reply to me on the community. All right. Thank you very much. And I will see you again all on next Sunday. Thanks a lot. Bye.